Mashugana is not only regarded as one of the best restaurants in Buenos Aires, it's ranked as one of the best in all of Latin America and has even appeared on the top 100 restaurants in the world list. I went for dinner and enjoyed their tasting menu, which consisted of modern spins on Jewish immigrant food. It turned out to be one of the best and most unique meals I had all year. Beautiful afternoon here in Buenos Aires. Right now I'm exploring the botanical garden and it is absolutely gorgeous. The amount of trees, plants, flowers, the variety with all of them is stunning. This garden is a must visit for sure, and the best part about it all is that it's free. But for me, the real excitement comes later this evening when I get to dine at not only one of the best restaurants in Buenos Aires, I'm talking about one of the best restaurants in South America. It's called Mashugana. In Yiddish, Mashugana translates to crazy, and it's no surprise that this is a Jewish restaurant. The first time I heard about the restaurant was on Somebody Feed Phil, season 2 I believe, when he went to Argentina and he dined at the establishment. It was a pretty funny scene, but the food looked amazing. Little did I know that only a few months later after watching it, I'd be here in Argentina with the chance to dine at the restaurant. So that's my plan for this evening. I have a 7 o'clock dinner reservation, so without any further delay, let's head to Mashugana. I arrived at Mashugana a bit before it opened, so I walked around the neighborhood to pass the time. However, when I returned to the restaurant, I noticed that something was different. Something was wrong. You see, that night did not go as planned. I unfortunately didn't get to eat at Mashugana. When I was walking back to the restaurant just moments before I was due there anyways because of my reservation, I noticed there was something different with the street. It was much darker. The thing is, the power went out. And it wasn't even a widespread outage. It was literally just that one street, that one block, and not every building on it was affected. But unfortunately, Mashugana was one of those places that did have to deal with no power. And with no power, the restaurant simply can't operate. But fortunately, I still have more time here in Argentina, so I was able to make another reservation, and I'm gonna try again tonight. So hopefully, Mashugana round 2 goes off without a hitch. So I'm gonna head to the restaurant and keep my fingers crossed and hope for the best. Let's go to Mashugana. Once again, I was back at Mashugana, but this time the lights were on. Although I've gotta say, the lights probably didn't make much of a difference because it's a pretty dimly lit restaurant to begin with. Nevertheless, I appreciated the interior. With the candlelit tables, the establishment had a romantic vibe. By utilizing a QR code, I was able to access the menu. It was a bit intimidating. The menu was entirely in Spanish and consisted of a number of dishes that I wasn't too familiar with. However, I saw that there was a 6-course tasting menu, which seemed like the easiest and best choice, so I went with that. Although my waiter warned me that it was very filling, and as I was about to find out, he was not kidding. But first up was my beverage, which was included with the tasting menu. While it was stated that the drink wouldn't contain any alcohol, my waiter asked if I would want an alcoholic beverage, and of course I said yes. The result was a sort of Aperol spritz, which was very tasty and refreshing. It's not often that I get to enjoy tasting menus which include beverages, so this was really appreciated. The bread basket came, and it was a pretty good spread. In fact, it could serve as a decent meal just by itself. There are 3 different varieties of bread, but there was also salt, pickles, a kind of schmaltz mixture, and olive oil. Each type of bread was fantastic. They were fresh and full of flavor, but I really enjoyed all the accompaniments that were included. When it comes to bread, I'm used to just getting butter or olive oil. Mashugana really took things to another level. Since I still hadn't even started the tasting menu, I was conservative with how much bread I ate, but occasionally I would nibble on it throughout my meal. That proved to be a good move, as my first course was served, the baba ganoush. My first thought was that this wasn't a tasting portion, it was a full-on plate of food. In fact, my dinner at Mashugana turned out to be one of the most filling tasting menus that I've ever had. In regards to the dish, it was incredible. It's definitely not your typical baba ganoush, as the eggplant was left whole, but it certainly maintained the spirit of the dish. The eggplant was smoked and had a wonderful texture and flavor. There were a lot of different elements on that plate as well, and they all worked together beautifully. That was probably the best baba ganoush that I've ever had, even though it looked very different from every other example that I've consumed. Next up was another impressive course, not just because of its sheer size, but also because of its originality. It was a sort of beef tartare with bulgur wheat, harissa, oil, and almonds. Alongside it were these massive and well-seasoned fried pita chips. After mixing the tartare with all the other components on the plate, I was meant to break off pieces from the chips and top it with the tartare mixture. Simply put, it was one of the best chips and dips that I've ever had, although that description doesn't speak to the sheer elegance and sophistication of the course. The flavors were bold with a bit of spice, and the crunch from the chips was welcomed. So far, Mashugana's tasting menu was 2 for 2. Following the tartare were the varinkis, which were potato ravioli-like dumplings in a chicken broth with fried onion strings and an onion confit. Out of all the courses I had that evening, that one tasted the most familiar and straightforward, but nonetheless, I loved it. The dumplings were perfectly executed and sat in a very savory and rich broth. Both forms of the onion provided not only differing textures, but also varying flavor profiles, which I enjoyed. To me, this dish was pure comfort food and another solid course. Following the varinkis was a wonderful and beautiful Jerusalem mixture of food that centered on sweetbreads, which is a very appetizing way of referring to the thymus or pancreas of a young animal. Honestly, I haven't had the pleasure of consuming many sweetbreads, but these were far and above the best. And that's saying something, considering that most of my experience eating the meat has been in Michelin-starred restaurants, such as when I enjoyed the sweetbread course off the tasting menu at the Michelin-starred Restaurante Clos in Madrid. Mashugana's sweetbreads were rich and succulent, but the other components on the dish lent a variety of pleasurable taste and textures which I loved. It was definitely a great plate of food. However, I do have a complaint, but it's not so much about the food, but rather the composition of the tasting menu. Out of the 4 courses that I've consumed so far, 3 had a very prominent element of creaminess. While I enjoyed every dish, I would have liked a bit more variation in regards to the dominant textures. But don't get me wrong, I was loving my food, and my next course was a signature of the restaurant that I was dying to try, the pastrami. Being that I live in New York, I've enjoyed many fine examples of pastrami, but Mashugana's offering was a bit different than what I was used to. Their pastrami comes cut in one big slab of meat. Now, it doesn't have the bark lining its edges like a New York City pastrami sandwich, but it does have the flavor and a hell of a lot of it. The meat was so tender, I didn't even really need a knife to cut through it. It was an excellent chunk of meat, but it was further amplified by the rich and savory broth as well as the farfalle pasta it was served with. After just a bite, it was pretty clear why Mashugana is so well known for their pastrami. If I ever return to the restaurant, I would be interested in trying some of the establishment's more elaborate pastrami offerings on their a la carte menu, which consist of pastrami and potato latkes, and a pastrami that even comes on the bone. I was incredibly satisfied with the dish, but now it was time for dessert. I was presented with a beautiful, almost pie-like slice of walnut baklava topped with a very strongly flavored ice cream. It was certainly a satisfying conclusion to the tasting menu. The dessert had a wonderfully sweet flavor, but the texture was a bit more on the crumbly side rather than maintaining the traditional flaky structure of a baklava. While I do prefer a flaky baklava, I still enjoyed Mashugana's example. As far as the ice cream, it wasn't subtle by any means. Unfortunately, I forgot what flavor it was, but I did like it when paired with the baklava, but by itself, it may be too bold for some. But overall, it was a pleasurable dessert to consume. While I was getting pretty full, my dinner wasn't over yet as I had my choice between choosing either coffee or tea. I of course chose coffee, and I was presented with a very beautiful receptacle containing the sugar, but I always have my coffee black. It ended up being a very solid and satisfying shot of espresso. Finally, I was given a small plate of petit-fours. Each one equated to be a delicious bite. I couldn't have been more happy with my meal at Mashugana. The food, of course, was excellent, but the service was top-notch and incredibly helpful when my Spanish was clearly not up to par. In addition, every course arrived at my table at a good pace, and I enjoyed the restaurant's atmosphere. For the tasting menu, the bill came to 28,900 pesos, but with my tip, I believe I spent either 33,000 or 34,000 pesos. Since I paid in cash, it did take a bit of time to count out that much money. At that point, the exchange rate was about 500 pesos to $1, which meant I spent about 68 bucks for my dinner. While that definitely makes Mashugana a costly restaurant in Buenos Aires, if that establishment was located in New York City, my bill probably would have been 3 times that amount. In conclusion, I was so satisfied with my dinner. It was by far my favorite dining experience that I had during my trip to Buenos Aires. Oh, I am back at the hotel, and I'm so stuffed. That was so good, but those are not some dainty little tasting menu courses, no. Those are full-on, hardcore plates of food, and it was fantastic. Without a doubt, if Argentina had the Michelin Guide, Mashugana would have a Michelin star. The restaurant is excellent. The restaurant does serve a number of traditional Jewish and Middle Eastern dishes, but they're taking it to a new level, interpreting it in ways that I really haven't seen before. And I really appreciate that. While it seems like there are a number of fine dining restaurants out there these days, there are so many that are really good, but they just don't stand out as much. Mashugana stands out. Overall, I'm just so happy with my experience, from the food to the service, and the fact that I was even able to eat in the restaurant after last week's fiasco. I am pretty satisfied. Mashugana is without a doubt a destination-worthy restaurant here in Buenos Aires. It is incredible.